Hey, we're glad to have you here today for our next episode of Bold Leadership. Today we're going to talk about how the military builds leaders through seemingly meaningless tasks. And as you know, we're both former Air Force vets, and we've spent a lot of time leading companies and organizations across the globe. But it's interesting how we define culture in the military. And I'm going to start with a real quick statement, and I'm going to let you take over, Phil, because you have so much insight on this. It's interesting when I go into businesses and talk to them, they talk about how, well, military leadership doesn't work in our organization. You know, you can't do what you do in the military in our organization. And it's an interesting statement. I'm going to give it to you now after making that statement because I think there's a lot of insight for people, and they want to hear from you, not from me on this topic.
Well, I think the first thing is that's not a true statement. One of the first things you learn is that most people, unfortunately, if they never served, form their opinions based on what they see on the little brown box or black box TV set. And that always portrays military leaders as screamers and yellers, and they're, it's this just barbaric way of communicating, and nothing's farther from the truth. When you go into basic training, there's a degree of loud conversations, but that's because you have a very short window to make such a fundamental change. And what takes over, for example, Dave, in basic very quickly, is getting into the details, and what they're really trying to teach you is a culture and how to think dynamically and how to communicate with one another, how to come together as a team and work. So I'll give you a great example. Anybody that's been in the service understands folding their drawers in 6-inch squares, right? Now, the truth is, nobody really cares if your underwear is folded in a 6-inch square, but they want to get you in the practice of
now, wait, hold a second.
things done.
My wife does care about the drawers being folded and tidy put away, so it does apply to marriage as well.
I do apologize for that. You're right. It does. She does.
Sorry.
But besides marriage, it's all about establishing processes, procedures, communication, working as a team, expectations, follow through, all these things that obviously are needed every day in the business world. And so misconceptions run wild when it comes to leadership in the military.
Well, I think it's interesting because what they're teaching you is your role and your position at the current time and what it means and how much it matters to be that good at silly tactical things, right?
Yeah.
And as you're a brand new salesman coming into an organization, you need to be really good at the tactical art of your product and selling. If you're a operational manager, if you're wherever you are, you need to understand those little things that make you that much better.
Yeah, it's for example, if one organization that I've done a lot of work with, they had a process called the 60-60-30 business plan, and it was a Federated Mutual Insurance Company, and their thought behind that was you take a top 60 prospects that matched their market, what they wanted to do business with, those companies, and if you'd identify 60, out of that 60%, the second 60 would let you provide with a competitive quote. Of that, if 30% of them said yes, then you would write 10.8 new accounts, 11 new accounts. And it was always interesting, their President's Council winners, the top best of the best of their sales force, about 500 people across the country. Every one of them, if you sat down and talked to them and you could look at their planner or look at their smartphone or their iPad or wherever they keep their calendar and their planning tools, every one of them followed the business plan to a T because it fit. It fit the culture. So that means there was clear communication, there was clear processes in place to help whenever you were struggling. And most importantly, Dave, there was a process to follow. And too many times, we forget. Everybody thinks that they can do everything off the cuff, and that's never more true than with any group than salespeople, right?
Absolutely.
I can say this because I've been one my entire life. Sales reps, we automatically think that we're different than everybody else, and that we can remember everything we need to remember, and that we've got this down cold. And it's just, it could be something as simple as having a pre-call planner that you sit down and fill out prior to going out and visiting with somebody. Take 5 minutes and just hit the highlights. Say, okay, this is what I want to visit with them about. This is what my value prop. These are probably objections. This is what I'm going to, something as simple as that. built in your process will increase your revenue drastically over the course of a year. So, it's just important to remember it's the little things that create great results.
So that brings up a great question. We're going to talk about training next, and
Okay.
you and I have been through training every day of our life, and then some. And one of the things that I see companies doing, especially when times get tough, is they cut their training staff.
Yeah.
That's a really bad idea. So I'm going to ask you, in your biggest failure, challenge, or obstacle, how did training impact your performance?
Wow. I didn't know I was about to bare my soul today. I would tell you that my biggest failure.
Well, I'm going to let you think about it. I'll share a story real quick while you're
Okay.
thinking, because I've thought through this a little
Yeah.
bit. So here I am. I'm an instructor pilot. I'm flying 707s, and we're flying into Milton Hall, England
Okay.
for a landing. The winds are out of limits, so we are trying to figure out what our plan is, and all of a sudden the winds come in limits. I'm an instructor pilot. I am the man. I am God's gift to aviation. At least I thought I was. I was a young
Sure.
captain and invincible.
You better think that if
Right.
you're flying one of those.
And so the co-pilot goes, "Sir, do you mind if I do the landing in a max crosswind situation at night at a strange field?"
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, I got this. So we're flying down the approach. We come into the runway. We're crab. The nose is pointed 12 degrees off runway heading. My young co-pilot, sweating through his flight suit, lands the airplane in the crab. The airplane proceeds to yank to the right. The left wing comes up, and I thought I ripped the number one engine off of the airplane. The co-pilot,
well done, Captain.
Well, the co-pilot was so numb to what was going on and so intent on trying to land the airplane, he had no idea. I was white as a ghost.
That's funny.
But it was one of those situations where my training kicked in,
Yeah.
and we did the right thing and didn't tear the airplane up like we should have. Now, I should have taken the airplane sooner, obviously, and I learned a valuable lesson that day, which I carried through the rest of my career. But what I will tell you is when you train for those situations, you just react.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that story. And tact, that helps. That brings back many times, and it's going to be hard for me to pick just one where I failed, but I'll try to try to figure out a good one there for you guys. But it'd probably go back to being on operations and anybody that's ever served in a forward operating unit understands that there's the one absolute certainty is that nothing stays the same. Nothing is certain. Nothing. You can do something a million times, and in the million and one time that you try it, everything goes to heck in a handbasket, and now it's back to your what? It's back to your training, and there's when you're repelling was one of my first ones where I really experienced something that was an opportunity for me to make a mistake, and by panicking, not having a process, not having any kind of system to fall back on. But if you ever had a carabiner fail, it's not a fun thing. And one of the things they teach you early on in air assault, or if you're wall repelling or any type of rope work, is how to break yourself if you have a catastrophic failure. Now this isn't as sexy as catastrophic failure in an aircraft.
It's more sexy because you're on a rope and it's your body.
But when your head's pointed straight down, yeah, it scares you a little bit. And that was the other thing. We were doing what's called the Korean too, which Korean's when you're going down belly first against the wall, head down. And so, it was a bad time to have a carabiner failure, and and I just followed my procedures and followed the training, and it worked. And I think that probably the most important thing about that is all of my fellow troopers around me got to see it work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Team
so you learn a lot. I'll give you another one. And this isn't life or death stuff, but when going through training, a lot of people, again, I'll use TV as a reference because that's how many people correlate their understanding of what the military does, and most of it is not accurate. I'll add that, but one thing that is accurate is they like to show SEAL teams, PJs, a lot of different combat arms teams running around with the PT log. And what the PT log is, it's a 150 to 200 pound log that 6 or 7 men will carry on their shoulder everywhere they go. And a lot of people will see that and they go, man, those guys have, it's not about the physical part of that. It's 150, 200 pounds. It's not very heavy when you got 6 or 7 people on it. So, but it's work learning how to run properly in cadence, carrying that log, how to walk, how to set it down correctly, how to pick it up correctly. It's about communication. It's about teamwork. It's about if you've got a person that's maybe a little shorter, if you got one person on your team that's 6'5", another person on your team that's 5'5", And then think about that with the law. How's that going to work, right? So there's a lot of different things you got to think about. And so I think that, like most things in the professional world, it's all about communication. It's all about that process. It's all about, if you are struggling with something, having a culture that allows people to communicate back and forth freely so they can come up with the right solution. And that's something that I always appreciated about our time in the military. And we've seen it also with many great organizations out there in the world that have great cultures and that really encourage that kind of communication, that type of exchange. So very important.
And I think to tie this back to the business world, which is where we are now, is that when you are in a company, in an organization, you have a process to fall back on and things start going badly, whether it be a sales meeting, whether it be a production line, whether it be a logistics movement of equipment, whether it be a CFO discussion about finance in the organization. If you have processes to fall back on, you'll catch mistakes.
Yeah, every time.
And you can recover much more quickly. I've heard a number of business people say, well, I don't like to plan, right? and they use Tyson's quote, well, a plan goes to hell once you punch in the mouth. Well, what I will tell you is that the plan is the only thing that keeps you alive
when you get punched in the mouth. That's exactly right.
Because you know where you are right now, where you should be, and where you need to be 10 minutes, a month, a quarter from now. So I can't emphasize that training and planning enough.
Well, one of the things, one of the systems that we practice and that we also train and teach others too is the 12-week year.
Yeah.
And having the ability to, we've got to give a shout out to Brian Moran and Mike Lennington that created the 12-week year. But having the ability to have a process in place that says, there's so much annualized thinking, right?
Right,
Long-term
absolutely.
thinking. So instead of saying I want to make $250,000 this year as a sales rep and then forgetting about it, because what normally happens is you set that goal in early January, then you take about a month and a half off because you got all this time to get it done, and then you go through this process, then you wake up and it's October and you're at 40% of plan and you're like, holy, what am I going to do?
Well, you had vacation in July and August, right? The kids going back to school, you got busy, you weren't tracking what you were doing.
And so
October comes around, it's oh darn.
Oh darn, yeah. A little worse word than that probably, but oh darn is correct for today. But so the 12-week year, what it does is it quite simply takes that annualized thinking and brings it into periodization thinking or quarterly thinking, to where you can make, when you're executing your tactics and your strategies, to realize your 12-week goal, which you break down from 12 weeks to a weekly goal to a daily goal. You're doing that kind of detailed planning and then processes in place to help you execute on it with good tactics and strategy. It's very hard to fail.
Now, we have a copy of that 12-week calendar, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I tell you what we're going to do. For the podcast, the download links, we're going to make a copy of that 12-week calendar available to you for listening to the podcast, so you can look at it and see if it's a fit. I'm going to tell you, it's a way to plan your year out and set your goals in an appropriate fashion and move ahead with a good plan and knock the socks off your competition. Yeah,
and it's fun because I've been utilizing the 12-week year now for about 17 years. And I can tell you it's not coincidental that my business took off about 17 years ago, about 16 and a half years, because you really start seeing the results 3-6 months into it. And I mean measurable, shocking improvement. And so, if you will commit to that process and you'll follow it, and that's one of many that we work with, but for sales reps, for leaders, for anybody that's working on where they have a lot of freedom in their day-to-day activities, and anybody that's typically measured by the revenue they bring into an organization,
Which should be every
employee. Right? I'm grinning when I'm saying
if they're not bringing money to the company, what are they doing for you?
You're dead overhead.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so you've really got to, that's a plan that I know we'll be doing more on this, but it's something that's really there that can help you. So I look forward to sharing that, and we've got other tools we can share as well, but I look forward to you guys taking a look at that calendar.
Yeah, and the big thing is we want to make sure you have the tools you need to do your job, and if you need help, reach out.
Absolutely.
On email at info@exsin.co. Be more than happy to answer your questions and work with you. So here's the next question. We missed this last week, so we're going to get it this week. What do you see as the biggest leadership challenge companies face today? And what was your lightning bolt moment for your biggest leadership challenge you faced as a business owner?
Well, I think for me, it's a lack of understanding that folks, I'll say my age, because I'm a little older than you, Dave, but my age.
Grandpa.
Yeah, Grandpa. 5 times. But anyway, it's I'm 51 years old, and I came up in a time when leadership was defined and executed in different ways, and we've had to evolve over the years to stay current and stay relevant. But understanding the millennial generation for any organization is difficult, not because they're not great. I've told you many times, I think the millennials I feel wonderful about where they're going to take our country and how they're going to lead us, because I like the way they think. Now it's different, it's a different way of getting there, but boy, I tell you, they focus on those things that matter. So to answer your question, it's how do you communicate effectively and create a culture to where old guys like me can not just survive, but we can thrive with people 22, 23, 24 years old and really share, because us older guys have some good things to bring to the table. So do those younger
bumps
folks.
and bruises.
Yeah.
Keep
the
them
bloody
stubbing your
noses.
toe again.
Yeah, the bloody noses. But we've got some good things to bring to the table, as do the millennial generation and everybody in between. So we had to create a culture to where that was where communication and embracing one another's ideas and concepts and processes was not only encouraged but really demanded, because that's where everybody's going to find self-fulfillment and satisfaction, is when you're all hitting on all 8 cylinders and everything's working right. I mean, that's when everybody's the happiest.
So this goes back to the topic of today, seemingly meaningless tasks.
Right.
The interesting thing that people don't think about in the military is that most of your warfighters are between 18 and 25. 18 and 25.
90% of them.
Most of your general officers, a lot of them are younger than
Us.
Phil and I. And they're leading hundreds of thousands of young men and women.
Yeah.
They have learned through hundreds of years of experience that we ingrain a certain culture in every service. We ingrain a certain way to do things, and we allow young people to bring their ideas to the table and test new ideas. And that's what brings them into the culture of the military. That new guy comes into the unit, and you're the old commander dude or the old chief. You're listening to these young people because they're bringing new stuff to the table you never thought of.
What I love about the armed services is that how they embrace new team members into the organization. I mean, you get right down to when if you go to a new duty station, you got a sponsor that's waiting there. Even before you get there, you're communicating with that sponsor, that person that's going to bring you on the base. From everything from little mundane tasks like here's the dry cleaners, here's the PX, here's the base gym, here's all these things, to more detailed things. And so something as simple as having somebody to basically be your friend right from the jump to help get you plugged in to those things that you need to be plugged into. It's all thought about, and there are all those little things. But man, again, those little things are what end up with greatness. So,
and that goes to the question we need to ask for the business owners out there: what is your sponsorship plan for your employees?
Yeah.
How are you onboarding them? How are you bringing them in and making them feel welcome and a part of your team? How are you teaching them your culture? More importantly, do you have a culture?
Well, and
do you know what it is?
That's what you really find out most times, is that there isn't a culture. There's nothing out there. It's just they come in, they do the same thing every day, and hopefully they'll have some success along the way. One of the best cultures I've ever personally seen is inside an organization called Colonial Life. It's a company out of South Carolina that we've done a lot of engagements with over the years, from leadership to sales training to everything else. But the way they welcome a new member on is incredible, where they have a mentor and they stay with them for a long, long time, and they help them every step of the way. Think about this. If you take Company A and Company B, Dave, and Company A, you show up, you fill out your paperwork, they show you sit here, go ahead and start doing this meaningless task. They'll give them. They'll say, I'll check in with you in a few hours, see how you're doing. Compared to Company B, that when you show up, your desk is prepared, all your gear's on there, maybe you have a few nice little pieces of swag, maybe a company hat, a company shirt, some pads, a pen, something cool, like a gift, crazy idea.
Make you feel welcome.
Make you feel welcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on top of that, maybe then you're assigned to a mentor whose job is to, not the HR department's job, although it could be somebody in HR, to go around and introduce you to the people in the organization. If it's a larger organization, introduce you to the people in your office or the area that you're going to be working in. And just spend a couple days investing in that employee to make sure that they're comfortable.
Building bridges.
Building bridges. I mean, it goes back to why do you carry the PT log, right? So if you got a new person, they're going to hop on that log, and maybe that person's 6'5" and everybody else is 5'5". How are you going to deal with that? You know, what are you going to do? You know, no two people are exactly the same. I've yet to see that. And so while the people can have similarities, you and I have a lot of similarities, but we're very different people.
Yep.
And so it doesn't mean that we want a bunch of clones. That's the last thing you want. But you got to have a culture where people can thrive
and work as a team.
And work as a team.
And know their role
every time.
And execute.
Well, if you don't know your role, if you don't execute, you have no chance of achieving greatness. You just have no chance.
You're just drifting.
You're drifting.
Yeah. All right, let's see. We got time for one more question.
Okay.
So, in your company, biggest leadership challenge in your lightning bolt moment when you go, I get it.
Yeah.
I get that these seemingly meaningless tasks mean something, and I understand why we do what we do. Because I can tell you, in basic training, you're like, whatever, man. I'm just getting through the day. I'm going to do what they tell me to do. I just want to make it.
Don't yell at me.
I want to make it to lunch. I want to make it to dinner, right?
Please don't call me the snake pit. Please don't call me the snake pit.
So when did you realize that all these silly things made a difference? It was part of the culture to grow you into what you eventually became.
Well, I'm going to actually use an example. I'm not going to follow your exact, because I think this one maybe does a better job of giving a real world example. In basic training many years ago, and it was ironic, one of my sons, I have two sons that are currently, one actively serving, another son's on delayed entry. He leaves in 29 days to go to basic training. So, we're very much a military family, and it goes generations before my wife and I, but in basic training, that first 6, 7, 8 days is just crazy, because they're shaving your head, you're taking all your stuff away from you, you got nothing on you, you're a pickle, you got nothing on your uniform. I mean, it's just crazy. And so you go from that area to probably about day 17 or 18, Staff Sergeant Kirkpatrick, you never forget your TIs or DIs. He comes in on a weekend, and I was the dorm chief. They pick, they got 5 ropes, you got your red rope, your yellow ropes, and so you got the team leader, dorm chief. I was the dorm chief, and he calls me into his office, and I go in there, and he looked at me and he says, hey, relax, sit down. And he started having a conversation with me. And as silly as this may sound, I didn't think this guy was human up to that point. But the fact that, we had gotten deep enough into it, I had a leadership role inside my flight. The fact that he took the time to talk to me and say, hey, now you got these 2 guys here, this guy over here, I noticed they used to need some help here. And I was just sitting there dumbfounded going, he's human, but he was communicating with me. What that taught me was, and the reason it was such a lightning bolt moment, was that, those previous 16, 17 days, you were peeling back the onion, and you were stripping us down. You were getting us to where they could start building us back up. And then and they really do that first 7 or 8 days.
Absolutely.
From about day 8 or 9 to that day, for me, days 17, 18, when he came in, they'd start building. And we had gotten to a place, because that's the only reason he came in. I didn't realize that at the time. But the only reason he came in was to have that conversation with me on a Saturday, right? And it taught me, and I carry this today, that there's different stages in a relationship. If you think about dating when you were a kid, right? When you were courting your wife, you didn't start here. The first date, 5 minutes into, you didn't go, gosh, I love you. They ran, right? But you start and you develop that relationship, you develop trust, you develop confidence in one another, you figure out how that person learns, you figure out how that person receives. Same thing in military training, Some people you can scream at and they get it. Some people, if you scream at them, they shut down. Some people, to use an extreme example, but in the workplace, a good example might be, some people, if you bring them in and you talk to them like you're going to write them up and give them a reprimand, it'll crush them because they don't have the confidence or just the internal willpower to withstand something like that. So you've really got to understand your people, and that's what that taught me, is understanding individual people, because it was very obvious. I thought he just screamed at everybody, but it was very obvious when he started pointing out the different people. He knew where everybody needed help, and he was using me as a tool in the organization to help him get to them. And that was a neat thing to see, and it applies to anything we do, regardless of industry. Go back, have that welcoming culture, have that teaching culture, have that mentoring culture. And if you do those things, you're going to have excellence.
Well, and that leads us to this, and we've talked about this before, and you and I talk about it regularly, is personality types matter. And knowing other people's personality types drive you to be able to make those decisions, have those conversations, and understand what's going on in your organization. And we'll get more into DISC and how to use it as a leader in a later episode. But we are huge fans of leveraging personality tests to understand and communicate with others who are communicating in their language, not our language.
Yeah, because if you don't know how one another receive and give when it comes to communication, you're just guessing. And that's how misunderstandings happen. That's how people's feelings get hurt. All the things that take away from a productive professional culture, that's how those things occur. So something as simple as any type of assessment. We love DISC. We have several different assessments we use depending on the situation. But DISC assessment, for one, and I know we're going to go into detail, it does a great job of helping you understand how can I help this person the most, because you're understanding how they communicate.
Yep.
And you don't want to guess when it comes to building your culture.
No, you don't. So takeaways for today. 12-week year will be on this podcast, and download will be available for you. Folding your underwear in a 6-inch square matters.
Especially
it means
married.
something. It means something that to have that specific detail.
Yeah.
And we care about you and we want to help you. So for today, Phil and I are out of here. Thanks for listening.